Hey, it's Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD, bringing you a live Facebook Live, drive-by Facebook Live this morning. It's a bright, sunny morning in the greater New York metro area. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD, and I am a medical doctor, but from what I've learned in my 30 years, I can't believe it, 30 years of medical practice, is that what keeps us well or what gets us sick are kind of one and the same thing. It's our ability to manage the challenges of everyday life. And I know that in my career, in my professional and personal careers, if you will, I've learned that the mind, the body, and the spirit are all essential elements for us to live truly fulfilling and satisfying, vibrant lives. And of course, from a medical doctor, I'm concerned about those things as they apply to wellness and our health. And I would be remiss if I didn't address all three elements. And that's what I do here at CoachMD. I try to bring that to you. And I try to walk the walk. That's my goal. And what I'd like to talk to you today about is something a little grim, actually. That grim topic is death. And that goes in the spiritual category. Death is something that is a part of life, actually, is essential for us to understand and to be able to live with the inevitability that nobody gets out of this life alive. That's the truth. Some of you who have listened to my videos know that my mom was sick for about 2 months, starting at the beginning of May, and I had been bringing you some updates, and she did pass away a few weeks ago. And truly a sad time, absolutely. And it's given me a lot of kind of emotions to be able to process and to think about, as I've done with the idea of death for so long. I lost my grandmother, but I hadn't really lost anybody who was that truly connected to me. And to out myself, I'm actually going to be 60 this year. Can you believe it? 66. I think I I take care of myself, so hopefully I'm surprising some people out there. But to live almost 6 decades of this life and to have your parents around for most of that time is pretty amazing, and I feel grateful and blessed. But it has brought me to consider the idea of death and how important that is in our lives. Now does that mean a lot of people will say, oh, I have to complete my bucket list before I die? Well, I have some ideas about that, which I'm going to discuss in a few minutes. But one thing about this idea of death, and as my mother was sick, some pretty amazing things were happening that I'd like to share with you. And for those of you who hadn't listened to my previous broadcasts, I did mention a couple of them. And they were almost reassurances to me not to be worried, not to be concerned, not to be overly not to be overly drawn down by my mother's illness and eventual death. The first one, and I'll be brief about these, but the first one was when I was praying one morning, meditating / praying. There was a glass case, eyeglass case, that was on my dresser in the middle center of my nightstand. And during my meditation, I heard something fall to the floor, and it wasn't a loud crash, a small crash, but it was loud enough to make a mental note, but not to interrupt my prayer. When I was finished, with that, I opened my eyes, and I see on the ground, on the floor in front of me, was this eyeglass case that had fallen and opened up. It was in the middle center of my nightstand. There was no big breeze or earthquake that came through to knock it down. It just happened. So that was the one thing. How did that happen? Okay. Of course, logic and our five senses will try to come up with a logical interpretation of that, but I can't interpret that, only that this was some energy trying to kind of break through and let me know that everything's going to be okay. The second thing happened when my wife and I had been visiting my mom in the facility that she was staying during her illness. We were driving back, and I was feeling incredibly drowsy. And we're probably about 15 minutes from home, so I figured, or 20 minutes from home, we're close enough, I'm not going to stop. So I'm going about 70 to 75 miles an hour in a 65 mile an hour zone, which is not enough to warrant a police stop. And as I was doing that, I was in the lane, right lane, far left lane, and I passed a state trooper with his lights off. Nothing happened, I just passed him. His lights were off. About 2 minutes later, I look in my rearview mirror, and those of you who have had that experience know what that's like. Saw those lights in my rearview mirror, pulled off to the side of the road. The state trooper comes to my window, big bright light, and said, "Sir, do you know why I'm stopping you?" I had in my license and registration, and he said, "You're driving without your lights." And I was, really taken back by that, because I always have my lights in my car set to auto, which means when it becomes dusk or dark, they go on automatically. Well, I looked down to the dial, wasn't near my wheel, but it was to the far left. And the dial was all the way counterclockwise to the left, meaning off. Now, that had to be consciously done by somebody, because I never do that. Never, ever. So I questioned everybody later on to find out, and it turns out nobody did it. Somehow it happened. And it was just a warning that the police officer gave me, and I went on my way with my wife. But I was wide awake at that point for the rest of the 20 minutes, whatever. All I can know is that something was watching over, because there's no way that dial could have been turned. There's no way. Not accidentally. It had to be consciously done by somebody. Okay, so that was those were the two things before my mother's death. My mother died on 2 weeks shy of her 85th birthday, and it was a Saturday that she died. That Friday night, my father, about 11:30 that night, the doorbell rang at his home, and nobody was at the door. And early Saturday morning, my mother was deceased. So that was another thing, that happened. Another thing that happened was I wrote about a joke in my book Brain Drain about 10 years ago that I hadn't heard in 10 years. And shortly before my mother's death, I turned on the radio, and all of a sudden that joke comes up. And I'll share that joke with you now, because it does segue into what I'm going to talk about and how that relates to death. Well, this gentleman comes to his religious, his clergyman, and says, "Sir, I'm very depressed. I'm very unhappy with life. I don't have anything." And the clergyman says to the gentleman, he says, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that your wife's so sick." And he said, "Excuse me? My wife's not sick. What are you talking about?" And then he goes back and says, I have nothing to be grateful about. You always preach about gratefulness, but I have nothing to be grateful about. And the clergyman says, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about you've lost your home." And he goes, "What, are you kidding me? I haven't lost my home." And the clergyman says, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that you lost your job." He says, "I haven't lost my job. I've had this job for a long time. It's a great job. What, are you kidding me?" And at that point, the man understood what the clergy person was talking about. He said to the gentleman, he said, "Well, you came in here telling me how depressed you were, because you have nothing for which to be grateful. All of these things we've talked about, your marriage, your home, your job, I think these are things that there's always, that you are to be grateful for, and these are always things for which we're to be grateful. So death, when death is inevitable, we all go through this life not knowing, what really truly is going to happen. Now, many of us, as I do, believe that there is an afterlife, but it's very hard for that to come through in our physical world, which is so convincing, is so entrenched in the physical, in our five senses, that to believe that there's something outside of that is so brutally difficult. So we go on in our lives and we think about accumulating a bucket list of things that we need to do before we die. But what does that mean? Well, we can't take those things with us when we die. We can experience them while we're alive, but we can't take them with us when we die. So what can we do? Well, we can live our lives so that when we do leave this earth, what we do leave behind are not a lot of experiences that we've had for ourselves, but we can leave behind a lot of experiences that we've done with others, or that we've left our legacy in the minds and hearts of others by what we have done for others, so they can live and pass those things on. And so when my mother died and I eulogized her, what I focused on were not the dysfunction that all families have and the things that we wish that our parents were better at or better. No, I focused on those attributes of my mother that are going to live on in me and my children. And one of the greatest is never to feel superior to other people. Always know that we all are children of God. We all have mothers and fathers. All of us. We all have mothers and fathers. Every single human being has mothers and fathers. Many of us are brothers and sisters that we have or we are. Many of us have aunts and uncles. We all have something. We all have that. So these are things that we need to consider in life. The things we're going to do, the experiences we're going to have, how are those going to live on in other people to elevate their lives and what they can pass on to make our world a greater place. And many people, the logical people who I know, who say, oh, how can you know these things? How can you know that there's an afterlife? How can you prove it? Nobody's gone there and come back. Well, I got news for you. Actually, yes, people have been crossed over and come back. And don't take my word for it. Go to the University of Virginia. Now, that's not some schlocky, fly-by-night, mail order, internet. Well, not all internet universities are fly-by-night, but it's not some fly-by-night university. Okay, University of Virginia is well-established, one of the oldest educational institutions in the United States. They have a department called called DOPS, the Department of Perceptual Studies. They have a catalog of tens of thousands of near-death experiences that they've cataloged and studied. So go to their website, University of Virginia, Department of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, and read about it. Read about all the near-death experiences. You may, the logical ones around us may have those experiences, may have explanations for them, the near-death experiences. But those pretty much have been debunked, and especially by this department that is not pro or con. They just, as any good institution, they've approached this from an unbiased point of view and have studied it. So understanding that we all are going to die, and that those of us who were, fortunate to have their parents around for so long and held on to kind of a fantasy that our parents were never going to die and that somehow we're never going to die, well, that kind of kicked me in the pants a little bit, and assured me that that's not the case. And even though I did know that, come on, you know, I'm an adult. I'm a medical doctor. I've seen it. I've lived it, you know, but I haven't lived it so closely as I have with the loss of my mother. So, these are just thoughts that I had for this morning to share with my CoachMD family, a family, as I talk about with my immediate family, that I have a whole family that they don't know about, whether it's my patients or my CoachMD family. And if you feel that some of these thoughts will help others who may be going through a loss, understand that loss allows those people who are now crossed over into a realm that we can't understand, let's call it heaven. They're now able to be that parent that they were never really able to be because of all the stresses and the struggles and the brokenness here on earth. They were not able to be possibly that loved one that you needed and wanted them to be. And now that they are free of all those shackles, of all the shackles of what I call the automatic brain, which is very ingrained in this real world, they're free of that. And they are free to be watching over you now and bringing you the best that they can be, unburdened by the traumas and the difficult realities of our daily lives. And so understand that those stories that I told of those glimpse breakthroughs that were shown to me, that were given to me as a gift to kind of allow me to understand that there is something greater to this life that lives beyond us. And our mothers and fathers, who all of us have, realize that. We are, many of us wonder, how does God, let's say for those of us who believe in God, how does God keep track of all of us and are in all of our lives? Well, maybe it's because of the army of guardian angels that exist, that are our deceased loved ones, that we're all connected to. All of us, 100%. So keep that in mind if you're struggling with the imminent or the obvious loss of somebody in your life who you love. So I'm Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD, about to sign off with you now. Until next time, I really greatly appreciate your time and being part of my CoachMD family. And please feel free to share this, or to, if you haven't, I do have an ebook which I think might be helpful for a lot of you. Fake News Stories by Your Brain, my brain too. It's really my brain. That's how I wrote it. So if you want to know about how my brain works, my automatic brain, just get that book. And of course, Brain Drain's going on my 10th year anniversary of that publication. That's hard to believe. Anyway, I'm Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD, tuning off for now. Thanks again. Love you all. God bless. And see you next time. Bye for now.